This is a photo of professional aviator Leslie MacDonald. Was he a Mac or a Mick? Even the birth, death, and marriage board are not sure. He was born as a Mac, but died as a Mick. His father, James, was a Mac, and Leslie signed his name as a Mac. Leslie MacDonald was born 12th March, 1890 in Bristol. He is here at home in his conservatory. In the early 1900s, Leslie did his schooling in Bristol. He enrolled in the Bristol Cathedral Choir School. Front of the cathedral facing west. The Bristol Cathedral School. The school's front entrance. This is the interior of the Bristol Cathedral where the choir would sing. Once he finished school, Leslie's first job was at the Bristol Carriage Works. His second job was at the Bristol Tramway and Carriage Company, learning mechanical engineering. This led him to working at the British and Colonial Airplane Company. Leslie came into his own by working on these newfangled flying machines. Here we first notice him with aviator Maurice Edmond at Lanark, 10th August, 1910. This is where Leslie met up with mechanic Frank Coles, standing. Leslie is sitting. Leslie had little idea here that he would be traveling with Frank to Australia by the end of the year. Meanwhile, a New Zealand aviator, J.J. Hammond, was practicing with the new Bristol box kite biplane on Salisbury Plain in September 1910. Here is Hammond with his English wife. Mrs. Hammond will soon be the first woman to fly as a passenger in continental Australia, with her husband as a pilot. Later, in November 1910, at Durham Downs, just north of Bristol, another aviator Frenchman, Maurice Tetard, was trying his hand in flying this Bristol machine. Here is a letter to Leslie's parents. It was written 29 September 1910. Dear Mother and Father, sorry I could not write before, but have been very busy indeed. I hope you have had a good time in Paris. I should have liked to have run over for a day or two myself, but I was flying myself for the first time on Tuesday, and in the evening one of our pupils smashed the machine up, and I've been very busy repairing it, as I want to get my pilot certificate as soon as possible to start making some money. I should have been flying well on Saturday, but for the smash, and intended you to come see me if it was convenient. But I will see you in London Saturday or Sunday evening, or both, whichever is most convenient for you. In any case, I hope to be flying perfectly in a fortnight, or 3 weeks, when I should like you to come and see me either at Salisbury or here. Salisbury I expect. However, I will see you soon if you write me 3 Ellie Grove Villas and arrange where I shall meet you. Your affectionate son, Leslie. Leslie wanted to get his ticket. To do so, he had to follow these rules. Once qualified, you were able to enter flying contests. Leslie MacDonald achieved his flying license number 28 on 15th November 1910. He was the first pilot to obtain his flying certificate on a Bristol. Notice how officialdom has misspelled his name. This is always a problem for historians when documents are recorded incorrectly. Here is the official Aero Club index card. He achieved his license at the tender age of 20 years. Leslie's official ID card. Notice his signature. Leslie's official Royal Aero Club card, granting him status number 28. Bristol was all abuzz when the British and Colonial Airplane Company showed off their flying machines at Durham and Clifton Downs. This is where Leslie MacDonald became a legend in his time by being the first to fly over Bristol skies. Still just an engineer, he flew No. 14 biplane by test flying it over Redlands and Black Boy Hill on Friday, 11 November 1910. A postcard to his parents. This is one of the machines that I shall be flying in Australia. Hope you are all well, as I am getting on fine myself. Love to all, Leslie. Advertisement in the Sydney Bulletins magazine announcing the arrival of Mr. J.J. Hammond. They are ready to take Bristol biplane orders. Here is Joseph Joel Hammond in Flight magazine. This shows the 50-horsepower Gnome engine on the No. 10 Bristol Box Kite biplane, January 1911, Perth, Western Australia. No. 11 biplane was kept in its crate in case of the need for spare parts. Hammond did exhibition flights in Adelaide. He also gave exhibition flights in Melbourne. However, Hammond's main job was to show the military in Sydney how the biplane would be ideal for aerial reconnaissance of troop movements. He flew Colonel Antill to the Liverpool encampment in Western Sydney. Hammond made news back home in Britain. The Airplane magazine shows him flying over Sydney's Ascot racecourse. We have Hammond on the left and MacDonald on the right at Ascot racecourse. It was a time of changing of the guard. In May 1911, Hammond left the Bristol mission. He left for New Zealand with his wife. MacDonald, the chief engineer, now became chief aviator. He was commissioned to complete flying exhibitions and to finalize the mission. MacDonald found front-page attention by taking up photographers. 11 May 1911. 21-year-old MacDonald reveled in the limelight. Mr. G.A. Hills was the Town and Country Journal photographer. Mr. Hills' article of his first flight was worthy of any journalist. Mr. Hills used 6 rolls of film in his 20-minute flight over Sydney. Here is a letter to the Australian Defence Department dated 2nd September 1911 from Sidney Smith, manager of the Bristol and Colonial Airplane Company. I intend to ship these 2 machines on September 14 to return to England, but if you can let me know some days before that date, I shall be pleased to deliver them to your department and to give the services of our pilot, aviator Mr. Leslie MacDonald, and our mechanic to instruct 2 or 3 of your officers until proficiency in aviation is attained, and some of your RAE mechanics in the erection and care of the machines and engines. The stock we have comprises a complete equipment from a small school, and Mr. MacDonald, who made a series of fine flights in Sydney, including the flight over Sydney with General Gordon, is one of the best aviators and is also a first-class mechanic. In regard to the reliability of our machines, the Bristol biplane demonstrated at Melbourne, Sydney and Perth, WA, has covered a distance of 765 miles in the air in 72 flights, 34 being passenger flights, and no known breakage of any description has occurred in connection with any flight. Major Foote, RAE, reported to you in February last on the Melbourne demonstrations, and General Gordon, Lieutenant Colonel Antill, can speak directly as to the Sydney demonstrations. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Sidney Smith. Meanwhile, a Sydney dentist and car dealer, Billy Hart, wanted to buy a plane. He already had cars, a motorbike, and a speedboat, so why not a plane? Billy got his wish. The only catch was that he didn't know how to fly. We see here Billy Hart as passenger, Leslie MacDonald as pilot, and the knowledgeable mechanic Frank Coles. Billy Hart bought the Bristol Box-Kite biplane for around £1,300. Billy was able to remove the included custom duty at a later date. However, with covert flying instruction from Leslie MacDonald, Billy was soon up and flying. MacDonald was instructed by the company not to teach, but only to sell planes. Before long, William Hart was flying over his hometown of Parramatta and his airfield home of Penrith. On 3rd October 1911, Billy's biplane flipped over in a sudden windstorm. It tumbled over and over at his Penrith airfield, and it eventually landed against a fence. Frank Coles and Leslie MacDonald took the wreck back to Billy's father's timber yard at Parramatta. There was plenty of room and timber here to repair Billy's plane. Before long, Billy Hart was back flying, and on the 5th December 1911, he gained his Australian flying certificate. Later, he was awarded certificate number 199 from the Royal Aero Club, UK. MacDonald soon left for England, since his mission was complete. He left the British and Colonial Company and moved over to Vickers. He became a test pilot. He tried out Vickers' new two-seater tractor biplane. In the meantime, Billy Hart wrote a letter to MacDonald, 24 October 1912. Hart had a crash in his newly built monoplane, and he had lots of time to write to friends from his hospital bed. Dear Mac, see by the papers you are doing some good flying on a mono. I have had a lot of flying here and built a beautiful mono and fitted the gnome to it. I had a lot of flights and unfortunately had a bad smash a few weeks ago and am still in hospital. Doctors pulled me through and I'm leaving and will be walking in 6 weeks, they say. Broke both legs and severely fractured my skull and concussed of brain and other injuries. They did not expect me to pull through, but I am now getting on all right and will be flying again in a few weeks, I expect. All's well that ends well. Trust you are getting on okay and doing well for yourself. What do you think of the mono? Regards, yours sincerely, W.E. Hart. Now in early January 1913, newspaper reports began circulating about the crash and drowning in the River Thames of MacDonald. His passenger, Harry England, was found drowned a day later. MacDonald was found 37 days later. The wreckage of the Vickers was found on the 5th of February 1913. The men who discovered the wreckage were rewarded £50. This is Leslie MacDonald's death certificate. On closer inspection, it reads, 13th January 1910, River Thames, off Dartford. Body found 19th February 1913, Chalk. Leslie Falconer MacDonald, male, 22 years, professional aviator, 24 West Park, Clifton, Bristol. Accidentally drowned owing to airplane which he was piloting falling into the river. Manager Sidney Smith sent a letter of condolence to Leslie's father, Mr. James MacDonald. Dear Mr. MacDonald, as one who knows your son Leslie better than most and therefore esteemed him highly, and as having received from him many acts of kindness and consideration, from him especially during our Australian tour, I should like to assure you of my deep sympathy which my wife and I feel for Mrs. MacDonald and yourself and family at this time. Yours very sincerely, Sidney E. Smith. A newspaper clipping of the day reads, "The remains were brought to Bristol from Gravesend in a closed motor hearse on Sunday, and it was a thoroughly motor funeral." The deceased aviator, who was only 22 years of age, was a former Bristol Cathedral schoolboy, and many of his old schoolmates attended the ceremony. The Bristol and Colonial Airplane Company was also well represented. There were dozens of wreaths, among them being one from the Bristol Cathedral Old Boys Society, with these words, "In loving memory of Leslie Falconer MacDonald, a martyr to science."